When I was around 11 or 12, I had already convinced myself that childhood was overrated and that I was ready to grow up. While my friends and I giggled over bands and celebrity crushes, underneath that, I was busy believing that childhood was something that I needed to outgrow fast, so I would act mature and far too grown up to care. I remember one afternoon when I was 7, when my mom wasn't home. I tiptoed into her room where she kept her makeup and heels neatly organized. I wasn't supposed to touch them, but curiosity and the allure of transformation took over. I put on eyeshadow too bold for my face, stumbled in her oversized heels, and saw myself in the mirror, enchanted by the older, polished version of myself that I saw. It wasn't long before I started breaking my school's uniform code and sneaking makeup into school, chasing an image I wasn't ready for. While my friends played tag, I was preoccupied with perfecting my eyeliner and lip gloss, stepping into a world I now realize came at the cost of the simpler, more carefree parts of myself. Behind that was something else, a quiet, gnawing pressure to be more than I was ready to be, and to know exactly already who I was at such a young age. It felt like I was skipping steps, rushing toward a future I didn't fully understand, but thought I had to embrace. And I started to wonder, why was I in such a hurry? And how many other girls feel that same quiet pull to grow up too soon? In my TED Talk, I'll take you on a journey of self-discovery and reclaiming a lost girlhood that seems to have been stolen by society's expectation. Looking back, I realized it wasn't just me. It was the world around me, subtly encouraging me to leave innocence behind. The media I consumed, especially social media, including sites like YouTube, Tumblr, and Instagram back then, and the comments I overheard and the expectations I internalized, all whispered that maturity equaled worth, and that childhood was something to be left in the dust. But it's not just the media. As children, we're naturally inclined to mimic what we see around us, especially from those we perceive as authority figures. This creates a cycle where children strive to act older to gain approval, only to be judged or looked down upon for not truly being grown up. To break this cycle, we need to let kids just be kids, and to give them the freedom to play, explore, and stay curious without the weight of adult expectations like independence and responsibility. And to limit the exposure to social media, which often amplifies pressures on young girls by fostering environments where their worth feels tied to unattainable beauty ideals and constant validation from peers. Gentle parenting, for instance, can help nurture this freedom, fostering an environment where children can grow on their own terms, rather than rushing to meet standards they're not ready for. Why does this matter? Because when we rush to grow up, we're not just forfeiting carefree moments. We're bypassing the personal growth and discovery that these moments nurture. Growing up too fast can stunt emotional development, creating wounds we didn't even realize existed until adulthood. In these cases, during adulthood, we must focus on healing that inner child and reconnecting the parts of ourselves that we left behind, because we were too busy trying to run away from innocence. Connecting with your inner child can lead to personal fulfillment, allowing you to be more graceful with yourself by tapping into your childlike curiosities of the world and building a more compassionate and balanced future for yourself and others along the way. Growing up, there are subtle manners that become persistent thoughts which lead to how you see the world and yourself. For little girls, it's not just about the overload of the color pink in our rooms or the dolls that we play with. It's deeper than that. It's about how from such a young age we're taught that appearance and acting mature is sought after. With these expectations, it's easy for girls to fall into societal trends like the over-sexualization of girls and women, which immediately steals innocence away from anyone. Society places immense pressure on girls to embody femininity, which is established and reinforced through media, toys, commercials, and even something as seemingly benign as color choices. The difference between girls' and boys' toys is drastic. Boys are given toys that don't encourage an altering of appearance. Instead, they revolve around cars, weapons, and career-inspired tools like a doctor's kit or a fire truck. While girls are given toys that often resemble dollhouses, kitchen equipment, and toys in which you can change your look, which can later lead to comparison and low self-esteem. I remember seeing commercials targeting girls my age when I was 8, and so often there were toys that encouraged the change of your appearance, from hair highlighting chalk, plastic high heels, to makeup sets. From early on, girls are overwhelmed with images and narratives that set impossible standards of maturity, behavior, and identity. Like so many girls, I felt the weight of societal expectations early, much earlier than any boys in my class would. By the time I was in middle school, I wasn't just over my childhood. I wanted to bury it. I dressed older, I acted bolder, and made choices that looking back I wasn't emotionally ready for. It was rebellious, sure, but it was also exhaustion. Exhaustion from the persistent voice of society and those around me growing up, whispering that being a kid wasn't enough and that I was ready to be more and to have the responsibility of an adult with the world already figured out. This phenomenon isn't just personal, and the way that I was brought up, it's cultural. Psychologists call it gender socialization, the process through which societal expectations shape behavior and self-perception, often from a shockingly young age. For girls, this socialization often pushes premature emotional and mental maturity from being told to act like a lady, you're so mature for your age, you're an old soul, to navigating the unspoken rules of appearance and behavior. The journey through girlhood becomes less about self-discovery and more about self-conformity, with those common sayings that I myself have been told when I was a teenager. Girls are also being influenced to act and mimic the women that they see in media around them, which are behaviors and habits they are not quite ready for. Growing up in a strict household also encouraged this need. A desire for freedom, and freedom was rebellion disguised. But the way that I chose to escape was by growing up faster than needed, a rebellion which backfired, and now I seek to go back and get to know my childlike self. I see young girls trying to act older than they are all the time, but it's not their fault. Tween culture, the messy, awkward space between childhood and adolescence, has started to fade. It's now labeled as cringe instead of being embraced. But what exactly is tween culture? It's the time between the ages of 8 or 12 when kids are beginning to discover who they are, apart from their family and friends. These are critical years for development, where you start forming your identity. Unfortunately, the pressure to grow up fast doesn't just come from the adults in media. It also comes from other kids. In a world where maturity is idolized, even tweens themselves shame each other for acting their own age, reinforcing the idea that innocence is something to outgrow. It's like they're canceling their own phase, pushing themselves and each other to fit into a version of adulthood before they're ready. This internalized pressure strengthens the rush to grow up, ultimately weakening the opportunity for genuine self-discovery during such an important time in your life. These experiences aren't unique. They reflect broader cultural patterns. The over-sexualization of women and the decline of tween culture are not just unfortunate byproducts of media trends. They are damaging forces that can alter the course of a young girl's development. Instead of celebrating those awkward formative years between childhood and adolescence, encouraging girls to skip over that phase entirely. In her book, The Beauty Myth, Naomi Wolf explains how these pressures carry into adulthood, as girls grow up internalizing the belief that their value lies primarily in their appearance and their ability to meet external standards of maturity, which can lead to low self-esteem problems, according to Wolf. In Julia Fox's memoir, Down the Drain, she recounts a vivid moment from her teenage years, sneaking into New York City clubs with fake IDs, dressed to impress older crowds. She describes the rush of feeling seen, the thrill of playing a role that made her feel mature and sophisticated. But as she reflects, she realizes that these moments, meant to feel empowering, were filled with discomfort and self-doubt. Beneath the surface, she wasn't living in the joy of the youth. She was completely somewhere else and strayed away from the beaten path due to her difficult upbringing. Fox's story deeply resonates because it mirrors the same trade-off so many girls and myself make, opting for the illusion of maturity over the fleeting magic of girlhood. Looking back, her reflections reveal the emotional weight of what's lost when you trade carefree innocence for validation. The cultural obsession with rushing girls to maturity doesn't just affect their childhoods, it echoes well into adulthood. We carry with us the ideals we absorbed when we were young, the constant striving to be something, the polished image we're meant to project. This phenomenon is something Erikson touches on in his theory of psychosocial development. Adolescence is supposed to be a time for exploring identity, for figuring out who you are separate from others, but when young girls are encouraged to grow up too fast, that exploration gets interrupted. Instead of developing a strong sense of self, many girls end up feeling fragmented, trying to reconcile their authentic desires with societal expectations that don't align with who they really are. Judith Butler, in Gender Trouble, argues that gender is not an innate quality, but rather a performance constructed through repetitive acts dictated by societal norms. This idea underscores how societal expectations, particularly for girls, shape behavior and identity through repeated reinforcement of what is considered appropriate femininity. Butler's work highlights how these performances are not voluntary, but imposed, creating a framework where individuality is often subsumed by conformity. The question now is, how do we create a world where the next generation of girls don't feel this pressure? How do we let them experience the awkwardness, the curiosity, the freedom of being young without rushing towards adulthood? It starts with awareness, with recognizing how deeply these subtle messages affect us and with challenging those messages when we see them. It's about creating a space where girls are valued for their creativity, their intelligence, and their kindness, not for how well they fit into some idealized version of womanhood. Reconnecting with who we once were is rarely a straightforward path. It's a process that keeps unfolding. It's not about chasing some idealized version of nostalgia, but rather about embracing the pieces of ourselves that we set aside in our rush to grow up. It's about the imperfections, the messiness, and the layers of our experiences that we find something real. While my childhood was full of joy, it often felt like it ended before its time. Now, through creative expression and art, I found a way to revisit and reclaim those moments, not to relive them, but to understand them. Growing older doesn't mean we must lose our sense of curiosity or wonder. Instead, it's a chance to carry them forward in a new, meaningful way.